Hello, Telesur English presents a new episode of China Now, a web media's production that showcases the culture, technology, and politics of the Asian giant. In this first segment, China Currents dives into the top stories of the week, including Trump's threats to BRICS countries and also the completion of the world's largest pipeline between China and Russia, among others. Let's see.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, Trump threatens BRICS countries with 100% tariffs, which made Chinese laugh. China completes the world's largest gas pipeline with Russia. China launched first overseas atmospheric background station in Antarctica. BBC's Xinjiang-related fake news grilled Uniqlo in China. First, let's look at how Trump is going to tank the US economy. On the 30th of November, Trump publicly threatens BRICS nations, warning them against pursuing de-dollarization or creating a new international currency. He stated that failure to comply would result in a 100% tariff. Trump also claimed that there is no chance that the BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade. And if they tried, it would mean saying goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. However, three key factors contradicts with him. First, in terms of bilateral transactions, according to a report by Russia's TASS news agency, the banking network of Iran and Russia were officially connected on the 11th of November, allowing users to use Iranian bank cards at ATMs within Russia to receive funds in rubles. The governor of the Central Bank of Islamic Republic, Mohammad Reza Farzan, stated, "We have entered into a currency agreement with Russia and fully removed the dollar. Now we only trade in rubles and reals." He also mentioned that the financial authorities of the two countries have agreed on exchange rate to be used for foreign trade transactions. At the 2024 BRICS summit, Putin also stated that nearly 95% of trade between Russia and China is settled in rubles and RMB. According to Reuters, in 2023, the bilateral trade volume between China and Russia reached $240 billion, hitting a new record. Second, in terms of cross-border payment system, multiple BRICS members are establishing new systems, each with the potential to replace the US-dominated SWIFT system. China launched its cross-border international payment system, CIPS, as early as 2015. As the end of September this year, 1,566 banks and financial institutions from 117 countries have joined the system. Notably, after Russia was removed from the SWIFT system, CIPS processed 6.6 million transactions in 2023, a year-on-year increase of 50%. Russia also at this year's BRICS summit introduced its BRICS Pay system, which employs a decentralized cross-border messaging system developed by St. Petersburg State University. In this system, each participant manages their own nodes, ensuring that no single country can impose extraterritorial control over another financial system. This decentralized framework is clearly fairer than SWIFT, which, although based in Belgium, operates under US authority, enabling the US to expel participants at will. According to the Tehran Times, Iran has also introduced a payment system called Shitab, designed specifically for financial cooperation with Asian countries like India and Pakistan. Shitab processed transactions in less than 2 seconds, making it one of the fastest payment systems in the region. Compared to SWIFT, Shitab is more focused in its optimization and is specifically designed to better meet the need of Asian users. Finally, saying goodbye to the US economy in 2024 might not be such a bad thing. According to the US Federal Budget Accountability Committee, as of October 2024, the US national debt has surpassed $36 trillion. The cost of servicing this debt is $82 billion, which makes up 14% of total federal spending for the 2025 fiscal year. And this is 1% higher than the US military budget. On the 27th of November, Elon Musk warned, if we don't tackle the national debt, all tax revenue will go to paying interest, and there will be nothing left for anything else. If the issue isn't addressed, the dollar will be worth nothing. Chinese strategist Professor Wang Xiangshui further pointed out that with the debt crisis severely undermining international confidence in the dollar, Trump's ongoing threats to the BRICS nation with tariffs will only speed up the downfall of the dollar dominance. The BRICS countries are pushing for the de-dollarization because the US has weaponized the dollar by using it to sanction Russia, which has undermined trust in the currency. However, Trump's 100% tariff would only further weaponize the dollar and deepening the problem. Furthermore, maintaining the dollar dominance will only delay the inevitable collapse of the US debt crisis without addressing the root cause. The real issue lies in the last 30 years of deindustrialization, which has created a gap in skilled labor and shrinking domestic supply chain, making US manufacturing less competitive and, in some cases, incapable of producing certain goods. As a result, the US struggles with export and inflation, relying on continuously over-issuing currency to sustain an illusion of prosperity. Trump's proposal to revise the US manufacturing by raising tariff is also wishful thinking. At this point, whatever the US produces, BRICS nation can also produce. If BRICS countries respond to US tariff with their own, they can easily replace American goods with those from China, Russia, or India. Meanwhile, many US manufacturers rely heavily on Chinese suppliers, and domestic alternatives may not be able to meet the demand. Take electric cars, for example. Tesla has 4 factories around the world, and according to Inside EVs, the Shanghai Gigafactory has produced over half of Tesla's global output for the past 7 quarters. Tesla's Chinese partner Alset reports that more than 90% of the parts of the Model 3 and Model Y made in Shanghai come from local suppliers, which really helps cut down on operating and management costs. This setup also supports the rollout of the upcoming $25,000 affordable electric car. However, if Trump slaps a 100% tariff on Chinese parts, American consumers might have to say goodbye to Tesla. On the other hand, the rise of China and other BRICS countries has been fueled by generations of skilled workers in assembly and contract manufacturing, sustained government investment in infrastructure that reduce business costs, and companies that thrive through innovation and trial and error in a competitive market. Trump's desire to undo 30 years of BRICS progress just shows his ignorance and arrogance. His previous tariff war on China resulted in over 90% of the cost being passed on to American customers. If he keeps using tariff as his main tool, the consequences are likely to be even more painful than before. If Trump truly wants to save the dollar, he should demonstrate constructive wisdom and sincerity rather than resort to destructive threats to intimidate other countries. Meanwhile, another collaboration between China and Russia will enable Chinese manufacturers to further reduce costs. On the 2nd of December, China's single largest natural gas pipeline, the China-Russia East Route natural gas pipeline, is now fully operational. Stretching over 5,100 kilometers, the pipeline is destined for Shanghai. As the coldest time of the year descends on northern China, the demand for heating is surging. Signed in May of this year, the $400 billion project involves a pipeline that will supply 38 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually, which is enough to meet the heating needs for 130 million households for an entire year. In addition to securing energy supply, the project plays a crucial role in China's green transition, as natural gas produces significantly less carbon dioxide and other pollutants compared to coal. With a target to reduce carbon emission and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, China is taking significant steps towards sustainability. According to Chinese state media, the gas pipeline is expected to reduce carbon dioxide emission by over 160 million tons and sulfur dioxide emission by 1.8 million tons each year. According to the International Energy Agency, China is the world's largest importer of natural gas, with its demand projected to exceed 40% of global consumption by 2024. It also reveals that China's natural gas imports surged by over 140% between 2013 and 2019. During the same period, data from One Earth indicates that PM2.5 concentration in Beijing dropped by nearly 38%. Moreover, northern China is rich in sunlight and wind resources, allowing electricity generation in these areas to become less reliant on coal and other fossil fuel. According to the government's website, China's domestic solar power capacity is projected to double by 2026, reaching 1,000 gigawatts. By 2030, the total installed capacity for solar and wind energy could exceed 3,030 gigawatts. China is also advancing the environmental agenda in Antarctica. On the 1st of December, China launched its first overseas atmospheric background station in Antarctica. The station is designed to measure baseline or background concentration of various atmospheric components. Given that polar regions are remote from direct local pollution sources, they provide ideal locations for collecting baseline atmospheric data on pollutants. This data is crucial for distinguishing between natural and human-induced changes in the atmosphere. By understanding the natural variability of atmospheric constitutions in these regions, scientists can better assess the extent of human impact on climate change. Polar regions are considered amplifiers of global climate change. The observational data collected at the station offers unique geographic advantages and significant scientific value, aiding in the monitoring of changes in the temperature and atmospheric substance. For example, the fluctuation data of the annual average concentration of PM2.5 is reflective of the long-term observation results of the atmospheric background station. It is also worth noting that 2024 marks the 40th anniversary of China's polar exploration. Moving on the 28th of November, the BBC produced a report titled "Uniqlo Does Not Use Xinjiang Cotton," boss says, which swiftly thrust the Uniqlo brand into the spotlight of public outrage in China. The report begins by quoting Uniqlo's founder Tadashi Yanai's statement that China is a crucial market for Uniqlo, not just for customers, but also as a major manufacturing hub. Notably, Uniqlo retail locations in China have already surpassed that of its domestic market in Japan. Yanai even expressed optimism that the number of outlets could grow from the current 900 to 1,000 to as many as 3,000 in the future. However, during the BBC interview, which lasted about 10 minutes, the host abruptly raised a sensitive issue related to supply chain reform and human rights. Specifically, the question addressed whether Uniqlo uses cotton sourced from Xinjiang. Yanai responded with not using and reiterated Uniqlo's commitment to maintaining political neutrality, bringing the discussion on the topic to a close in 30 seconds. However, in its subsequent coverage, BBC chose to emphasize Yanai's response in Xinjiang cotton, and also included insight from Isaac Stonefish, CEO of Strategy Risk and former Asia editor of Foreign Policy, who stated not a single large company can remain political neutral anymore, and suggested that Tokyo will continue to align more closely with the United States on this issue. However, the reality is much more nuanced than these reports imply. In a separate interview, Yanai explicitly remarked that efforts by Japanese fashion retailers to decouple from Beijing are unwise, emphasizing that the importance of China and its management of factories remains unchanged. Earlier in 2021, Yanai openly declined to comment on whether Uniqlo uses Xinjiang cotton. He explained that his aim was to maintain neutrality between the US and China, rejecting what he termed America's attempt to compel companies to plead alliance in these disputes. For years, Western media has frequently hyped allegations of so-called forced labor in Xinjiang, pressuring companies to take a stance and attempting to disrupt Chinese-related industries. A Chinese content creator found significant discrepancies in the wording between the English and Japanese version of the coverage of this interview. For instance, the Japanese headline is titled "Uniqlo's President's Goal and Prospects," while the English one focused on cotton. This approach not only destabilized global market and supply chain, but also detriments customers worldwide. Many netizens in China expressed dissatisfaction with Uniqlo and called for a boycott of the brand. Some comments suggest that Uniqlo's attitude and the statement made by Tadashi Yanai came across as arrogant. In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning stated, "Cotton produced in China's Xinjiang region is among the best in the world. and emphasized, "We hope that relevant companies can eliminate political pressure and undue interference and make independent business decisions that align with their own interests." In the same interview, Tadashi Yanai also told the BBC that it is extremely challenging to replicate the success in China in other countries because it is easy to move factories, but it is extremely difficult to transfer years of experience. Of course, the BBC did not mention this in their report. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. We look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
And we have a short break now, but we'll be right back with more China Now. Don't go away. Welcome back to China Now. This week, Thinkers Forum receives political studies professor Rarika Desai and philosopher and politologist Alexander Dugin to better understand today's world. Let's have a look.
So I've entitled my talk, Crisis of Western Imperialism, Opportunity for the World Majority. You can doubt that the world's inherited institutions of international economic governance, erected after the Second World War, are in profound crisis. Sanctions, populism, friendshoring, de-risking, the deepening division of the world into two opposed camps, trade wars, technology wars, and wars pure and simple, like the ones that are going on precisely in this neighborhood, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. These are among the proliferating causes. The crisis is said to be one of multilateralism, by which is meant the practice of international negotiation among a large number of the world's countries, if not all of them, to conclude common agreements for mutual benefit. Those who label the crisis in this way call for a revitalization of this practice. However, multilateralism is actually thriving. The world majority, that is to say, the bulk of the world which is not included in the West, have tired of waiting for the imperialist West in its current dangerously petulant huff to demonstrate its much-touted multilateralism, and is getting down to the business of negotiating a still expanding set of alternative institutions, whether of trade or credit or investment or payments. And there is more to come in the upcoming BRICS summit in Kazan later this month. The United States led West, by contrast, and I will use the term to refer to the imperialist core of the world economy, as it was when the capitalist imperialism peaked in 1914, plus a small number of hangers-on that it has acquired since, as most clearly seen in a map of the countries that is imposing sanctions on Russia today. So this US-led West, which has for so long arrogated to itself the title of the keeper of the flame of this multilateralism, appears hell-bent on destroying the institutions it touted as its major achievements. Until recently, whether by weaponizing the dollar system, undermining the institutional core of the World Trade Organization, which is its dispute settlement mechanism, or bending the IMF's rules, for instance, against lending to a country at war, not to mention turning key United Nations agencies into playgrounds of corporate and Western NGO power. It's high time we woke up to the real content of the crisis. The structures of international economic governance burst after the Second World War were not pure and simply the work of multilateralism, but rather the vector sum of opposed forces and opposed principles. What do I mean by that? On the one hand, we had the United States. It sought to replace Britain as the managing segment of the world economy since the early 20th century, when it sensed that British power was waning. Having botched its first attempt to do so after the First World War, and according to its own leading intellectuals, I'm thinking of Henry Luce, the publisher of Life and Time magazines, got a second chance with the Second World War, it came to the negotiations at Bretton Woods and elsewhere, seeking supranational rules, essentially world laws, itself masquerading as world state. That is, the United States saw itself as essentially the substitute for the world state. And these ambitions, which the United States had already nursed by then for several decades, are the true origin of the theory of US hegemony, not any real state of affairs waiting to be theorized. The United States, at Bretton Woods and elsewhere, and this historical conjuncture, sought to transform the rest of the world into the equivalent of domestic territory, making national states redundant, fusing the world economies into a seamless whole for the benefit of US corporations, including by diminishing its allies' empires. As Karl Polanyi put it in a remarkably insightful article in 1945, the United States wished to return to a pre-1914 system of universal capitalism, when in fact, as he put it in his great book, The Great Transformation, it had collapsed once and for all and could not be brought back to life. This is what had happened in the 30 years crisis of 1914 to 1945. And the world, as Polanyi saw it, had objectively inclined towards planned economies and sought multilaterally derived international rules and norms that would enable and foster them. This universal capitalism that it sought, the United States deployed the extraordinary dominance that it had acquired over the world's economy as the only ally which, while suffering no war damage, expanded its economy and loan portfolio as never before as supplier of war material and credit to its allies. You see here a chart of US growth since the 1870s to about 2000. And the two big peaks you see there are the two world wars. You can see that the two world wars were the thing that really expanded the US economy. It's no wonder that the US economy is so addicted to wars. So that was the United States on the one hand. The opposed force was the rest of the world, which consisted of the United States' war-torn allies, as vulnerable to economic collapse as to the charms of communism, in an age when Uncle Joe was more popular in Europe than Uncle Sam, both at home and, of course, also in the sprawling empires of Europe. There was the Soviet Union and East European communist countries with their planned economies. And then there were the demands of the rest of the world, whether these countries were independent, as in Latin America and much of West Asia, or soon to be independent in Asia and Africa. And these demands were for industrialization and development. None of these three categories of countries could withstand the sort of liberal economy the United States sought to create without suffering economic damage and subordination, and they had no intention of doing so if they could help it. The story of the establishment of the structures of international economic governance after the Second World War is intelligible only if we understand that they were the outcome of an ongoing clash between these two principles of US supranationalism, sometimes helped by its allies and sometimes hindered by them, and the multilateralism of the rest of the world. The best way to understand US supranationalism is to understand that it as economically cosmopolitan. The German mercantilist Friedrich List used this expression in the mid-19th century to describe the sort of world order as envisaged by the then dominant capitalist country, Britain, designed for the benefit of British capital, a world opened up through formal or colonial or informal semi-colonial control for its commodities and capital, and to supply it with cheap commodities and labor. To this, List opposed the international world. So the cosmopolitan world is on the left here. It has no borders. It is simply a world over which the privileged, which can be controlled from London or New York or what have you. List, however, proposed a different type of world. To List, the world was international, a world of nation states, because he understood, as well as many others, including the United States' own Alexander Hamilton, and mercantilists like Henry Carey, like Marx, like Keynes and like today's development state thinkers, that a world in which some nations have already industrialized and therefore can command world markets, the only way for further industrialization, which is key to development in other nations, the only way for them to escape the fate of being subordinated to the dominant capitalist countries, of being their hewers of wood and drawers of water, is through the use of protection. And the entire slew of policies, infant industry protection, industrial policy, directed credit, export promotion, subsidies, tariffs, capital controls, among others. While such state-directed industrialization projects may fail, indeed we can see from the record of post-war attempts to develop in the Third World that there is absolutely no guarantee that they will succeed. No development is possible without them. This was as true in the late 19th century, when Germany, the United States itself, and Japan industrialized, as it was after, when the Soviet Union did, and in the mid and late 20th centuries when European economies and Japan recovered, or in the 60s and 70s when South Korea and Taiwan province industrialized, as it is true today as we see from China's industrialization. I will say parenthetically that it would be very useful to bear in mind that the word globalization is used in China in a very different way than it is used in the rest of the world, especially in the US-led world. In the latter, it means basically free markets and free trade, whereas in China, it means more trade through managed trade. The suppression of this truth, the truth that List identified, has been the overriding ideological mission of the West. If the ruling ideas of any society are the ideas of the ruling classes, the ideas that serve their interests and maintain their power, then the ruling ideas about a world order would understandably tend to be those of the dominant powers, that is, there being no world state. These ideas also tend to be useful in perpetuating their dominance, in particular by mystifying the real sources of national wealth and power. To retrieve this truth and propagate it, I have proposed geopolitical economy as a new way of understanding world affairs. And this is a book I wrote in 2013, and a very important quote of Marx, which you will see the significance of as I talk. Not only does geopolitical economy take the division of the world states into nation states and national economies, and between imperialist countries and those resisting them seriously, but it regards both divisions as structurally necessary to capitalism. It returns to Marx's original understanding of capitalism as contradictory value production, which is forgotten by most Western Marxists and most Marxist economists who derive their understandings from Western Marxism. So it returns to Marx's original understanding of capitalism as contradictory value production, and his understanding of international relations as the relations of producing nations, hence not geopolitics and geoeconomics, but geopolitical economy. It considers imperialism to be rooted in the contradictions of capitalism. It considers anti-imperialist resistance by those nations that capitalist imperialism would subordinate as inevitable, and as therefore expressing the contradiction of capitalist international relations. It considers, like Marx, both nations and classes to be agents of history, contrary to so much Western Marxism, which does not take account of nations at all. Marx says here, if free traders, he said this in 1848 at the height of the version of Marxism, which is generally touted by so-called Western Marxists as being globalist before its time. He says, if free traders cannot understand how one nation can grow rich at the expense of another, we need not wonder these same gentlemen refuse to understand how within one country, one class can enrich itself at the expense of another. This shows that for Marx, nation and class were two agents side by side, working together to make history. A geopolitical economy further considers the resulting dialectic or struggle between imperialism and anti-imperialism to be the principal motor that has driven the evolution of the capitalist world order since its beginnings. We can also think of it as a struggle between what Trotsky called uneven development, which privileges imperialism, and combined development, which constitutes a response to it in the form of state-led development. Between the denial of development, which is the essence of imperialism, and the pursuit of development, which is the essence of anti-imperialism. Between the complementarity that imperialist countries would impose between their own high-value production of technologically sophisticated goods and the low-value production of the subordinated world, and the latter's efforts to establish a similarity of productive structures. Further, geopolitical economy argues that in the contest between these two forces, the anti-imperialist side has tended to prevail, slowly but also steadily, making the world ever more multipolar, and that this meant that though some sort of British dominance was inevitable because Britain was the first industrial power, it was also short-lived and unrepeatable, and that the United States had the misfortune of being able to attempt to emulate that sort of dominance only after the world had already become multipolar and hence had already made such attempts unsuccessful. And of course, the US was also fated not just to face challenges from other capitalist countries, but also from socialist ones. Geopolitical economy finally considers the anti-imperialist resistance of national states no less essential to advancing humanity along the path to socialism, or a vision of egalitarian, prosperous, ecologically sustainable, and peaceful cooperative world under any other name. If you don't like socialism, you can call it whatever you like. So it considers this anti-imperialist resistance as being as important as the struggle of classes, women, peoples struggling against exploitation and oppression, an understanding which we and my colleagues and I, my friends and I, also managed to voice in the manifesto of the International Manifesto Group entitled Through Pluripolarity to Socialism. The geopolitical economy of the post-war system of international economic governance was the result, therefore, of the clash between US supranational or cosmopolitanism and the rest of the world's multilateralism, aiming to accommodate their need to breach liberal principles in the interests of recovery, socialism, and development. The principal parameters of the outcome of this clash can be briefly listed. The US desire to construct a liberal world order of the pre-1914 sort could not be fulfilled. The United States' ambition was always thwarted. It had to accept the creation of a United Nations, and though it corrupted its one nation, one vote principle with the permanent members of the Security Council, it had to its goal, had to include within those 5 permanent members the Soviet Union and China. And of course, the creation of such a United Nations also led the United States to create NATO as an alternative institution for the furtherance of its supranational ambitions. Though the US used its war-wrought power to prevent any alternative to the dollar, such as Bancor, issued by a multilateral international clearing union as proposed by Keynes, from being realized and left the world with no alternative to the dollar, it had to agree to continue backing it with gold, and it had to accept capital controls. It had to agree to a multilateralist ITO, the International Trading Organization, and though Congress failed to approve it, the fallback GATT also operated on a multilateral basis and eventually had to not only accommodate European needs of recovery and therefore manage trade, but also further in the 1970s during the Tokyo Round, the Third World's demands for a new international economic order. Though the US scored its biggest victories with the IMF and the World Bank, securing vetoes for itself in their design, they would remain relatively obscure until their heyday in the 80s and 90s. And the communist world remained outside these institutions, at least the IMF and the World Bank, which they saw as branches of Wall Street. We cannot examine the evolution of these institutions in any detail here, but 2 points may be noted. The Third World push for multilateralism culminated in the demands for the new international economic order, or many of these demands, to be realized in the Tokyo round of GATT negotiations. And the 1980s and particularly the 1990s witnessed a short-lived phase of US supranationalism. However, this period remained brief. By the early 2000s, people were talking about BRICS, and by the 2010s of multipolarity. The WTO, despite its supranational proclamations, remained primarily multilateral rather than supranational, and the planned multilateral agreement on investment was never realized. So, to conclude, what is today called the crisis of multilateralism is in reality a crisis of US supranationalist cosmopolitanism or US imperialism. That crisis has been long in the making and has reached something of a climax today. Though the crisis today takes a violent and conflictual form, thanks largely to the refusal of the United States and some of its allies to understand and accept the new world that is emerging with good grace, it is also allowing true multilateralism to emerge from under all these conflicts that have been caused by this refusal to accept. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much.
I think that the topic that is central in your gathering in the South Africa is of highest priority. To think about the place of the African continent and African countries and African people in the context of emerging multipolar world order is the central point, is a most important thing to think of, to discuss and to elaborate. Because first of all, we need to understand that world order is changing now under our eyes. The previous unipolar world order based on the unipolarity, on the hegemony of the West, of the globalist liberalism and capitalism and colonialism is over. The time, epoch, the age of domination of the West over the rest is over. A new world order is taking shape just in front of us. It is multipolar world order. African continent should be united and should become the real independent pole of the multipolar system. It is not enough to have in Africa such big countries and powerful countries as South Africa or Nigeria or Ethiopia or the other. So there are many serious and strong African countries, but they are incomparable in front of the other poles. In order to grant to Africa the real sovereignty, or that could be comparable with the other pole, we need to unify Africa. And that the relevance and central place of Pan-Africanist movement appears here. From the very beginning of anti-colonial struggle of African people, the best minds of African continent, Leopold Senghor, Krume, Sheikh Anta Diop, and many others, they dreamed about this unified Africa, Africa that will transcend the artificial post-colonial borders, cutting the tribes, the ethnic groups, the cultures, ancient African political entities, and imposing the colonial rules for the post-colonial Africa. So we need to think about how to help to the Africa to become independent pole, the big space, how unite Africa on the spiritual level, on the economical level, on the financial level, on the security level. So we need greater Africa as the new pole of multipolar world. And in order to do that, we need, first of all, to help to the African peoples to decolonize them finally, because after political decolonization, the colonial presence of the ex-colonial powers is still here in the mind of African people. So there is a kind of colonization of minds, because colonial powers coming out from Africa, they have left here their political ideas, liberalism, nationalism, their economical system, capitalism, market society, their cultural patterns that now embedded in the anti inhuman tradition of LGBT, post-humanism, and so on. And so the ex-masters and slave traders of the West, they are still controlling the African minds, political, cultural, social, economic minds, ruling Africa in the indirect way. So in order to get free, to liberate Africa from the colonial heritage, you need to make the final move for African liberation and decolonization of mind. And decolonization of mind could not happen only in one African country taken separately. So in order to re-establish the dignity of African culture, autochthonic African culture, we need to work together, to bring together different African people and to create greater Africa basing on African spirit, on African idea of anti-colonial, post-colonial, somehow pre-colonial identity. You know that your people, African people, suffered many years, the centuries from the Western colonialism. So many dead, so many enslaved people, so many suffering, violence, rape, humiliation of African identity. And you have passed through all these proofs. And now it is time to revenge. But the revenge should be repetition of the same attitude as the colonial masters have exercised against your heroic and rich, spiritually rich people. It is not African way to respond. I think the best revenge of the Africa is to make Africa great, greater than before, to unite Africa, to show the example of flourishment and prosperity of independent African pole, civilizational state of Africa. So I think that will be the revenge if you show your ex-colonizers the better way out of the present global crisis that the West is drowned in. So I think to restoration of the African greatness, the African dignity, that will be the best answer for those who tried to keep the African population as the slaves, as the subhuman, making genocide. For example, I could not without tears read about genocide of Khoisan people in Southern Africa, because the Anglo-Saxons and somehow Germans as well, they have totally eradicated the Tanos population, and how many Bantu people and other people, all people of Africa, how much you suffered from this colonization. It is impossible, it is incredible. And the West could not recognize fully its crime because they try to control still, to impose their rules, their principles, their values in African continent. And they don't help in the reality to the African revival. And they still exploit that special African character, very mild, very subtle, in order to continue to exploit African people, in order to liberate Africa and to create its place, its natural place, organic place in the multipolar world. We need to liberate Africa from any kinds of colonization, and first of all, from colonization of minds. And in that sense, Russia, as the country that never participated in colonial adventure of the West, never had any colony in Africa, Russia stays now at your side. We support you fully, and I hope and I believe that the same attitude will be confirmed from all our multipolar friends, from China, making many efforts to revival African economy, African industry, transport system. The same attitude we expect from India, from Islamic states, from Latin America. So the multipolar club, it is full of the friends of the Africa, sincere and faithful. And I think that together we will overcome, and we, with Africa and relying on Africa, we will create the multipolar polar world. So the African continent should be united in the transport systems and maybe making its own currency, Pan-African currency. We need to find the new identity to unite different ethnical and religious and cultural groups of Africa. So we need to make this African unity inclusive and not exclusive. We need to accept all kinds of identities, all kinds of traditional values of different tribes, ethnical groups, nations. And I think that is the challenge. We need to make Africa economically sovereign, culturally independent from all the rest. And when there are the friends, real friends of Africa, African people will be very grateful for them.
This was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and future of the Asian giant. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.